When you hear the word Paris, you probably think City of Light, right? But that's really only half the story. Its history is just as much a story of, well, fury. It's this wild, constant, and pretty brutal cycle of creation and destruction, ambition and revolution that has forged the city we all know and love today.
Yeah, I think this quote just says it all. A city of firelight and fury. It absolutely hits the nail on the head. It captures the soul of Paris perfectly. This incredible, constant tension between brilliant cultural achievements on one hand and a violent, revolutionary heart on the other.
So, to really get our heads around this story, we're going to break it down into 4 acts. First, we'll look at how it was forged in fire, then its rise during the Middle Ages, then we'll dive into the crucible of revolution, and finally, we'll see how it's dealt with the scars of modernity.
All right, let's kick things off with Act 1, Forged in Fire and Fury. We're going right back to the very beginning to see how a simple little settlement on a river was forced to become a fortress, just to survive. Just look at this timeline for a second. It's basically centuries of relentless, non-stop pressure. You've got the early Parisii tribe, then the Romans come in and conquer the place, you have the terrifying threat of Attila the Hun, and then the devastating Viking raids. From the very get-go, Paris was a city under siege.
And those Viking sieges in particular taught Paris a really, really hard lesson. After being blockaded and nearly starved into submission, the city learned a crucial truth. Survival meant building stronger walls. And this defensive mindset, it would end up shaping Paris for centuries to come.
And that leads us right into Act 2, Monuments and Massacres. This is an era where Paris reached for the heavens with these soaring, incredible cathedrals, while at the very same time it was being ravaged by devastating plagues and bloody internal conflicts.
You could call this Paris's medieval golden age. Construction began on the absolute marvel of Notre-Dame. The University of Paris was established, making the city a true intellectual capital. And King Philip II built the original Louvre, but get this, not as a museum, but as a massive fortress. By 1300, Paris was a European powerhouse.
And then, catastrophe. The Black Death arrived in 1348, and the toll was, well, it's almost unimaginable. An estimated half of the city's entire population died. Half. The story of Paris almost ended right then and there.
And the fury wasn't just coming from disease. The threats were hitting on 2 fronts. Externally, you had the 100 Years' War and the English occupation. But internally, the city was tearing itself apart with religious violence, like the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, which saw thousands slaughtered in the streets.
And this brings us to Act 3, the crucible of revolution. This is where Paris becomes the global epicenter for dangerous ideas, deep, deep inequality, and the kind of radical change that would ignite an entire nation.
See, 18th century Paris was a city of explosive contradictions. You had the light of the Enlightenment salons, where philosophers were debating liberty and reason, and then you had the fury of these filthy, overcrowded slums where people were literally starving. The pressure was building to a breaking point.
And on July 14th, 1789, it exploded. Parisians stormed the Bastille. Now, this wasn't some huge strategic military victory. There were only 7 prisoners inside. It was a symbolic act of defiance against the king. This was the moment the revolution truly began.
But what began with these high-minded ideals of liberty, it quickly descended into paranoia. This led to the Reign of Terror, where one terrifying question just hung over the whole city. Who was truly safe? And the answer? Nobody. The guillotine didn't just claim the king and queen, it took nobles, priests, and eventually the revolutionaries themselves. If you weren't seen as radical enough, you were next.
It's like they say, the revolution devours its own children. And it did. It turned on itself, consuming its own leaders like Robespierre. It was a brutal lesson in just how quickly idealism can curdle into terror.
So out of that chaos, who rises? Napoleon Bonaparte. He brings stability, but also a ton of ambition. He seizes power, builds these huge imperial monuments like the Arc de Triomphe, fills the Louvre with looted art, and for a time makes Paris the capital of an empire, before his ultimate defeat, of course.
And so we enter our final act, Scars of Modernity. This is where Paris gets radically rebuilt, where it resists occupation, and where it constantly has to reinvent itself for a new world.
And the reason for this transformation is just fascinating. Baron Haussmann didn't just create these wide boulevards for beauty and sanitation. No, he did it for control.
These new, wide streets were much harder for revolutionaries to barricade, and a whole lot easier for troops to march down.
I mean, this era from 1870 to 1914 shows Paris at its most volatile. It swings from the crushing defeat of the Franco-Prussian War to the bloody internal conflict of the Paris Commune, and then suddenly it flips into the Belle Époque, a golden age of art, culture, and innovation symbolized by the brand new Eiffel Tower.
After the trauma of World War I, that cycle of light and fury just kept on going. The Roaring '20s were pure light. Paris was the world's cultural capital, home to Hemingway, Picasso, and Chanel. But that energy gave way to the anxious fury of the '30s, with economic depression and the rising shadow of fascism.
World War II brought the city its absolute darkest chapter. 4 years of Nazi occupation, a time of fear, collaboration, and deportation, were followed by the defiant spirit of the liberation, when Parisians themselves rose up, building barricades once again to fight for their freedom.
And the cycle of reinvention just keeps going. The post-war years bring existentialist philosophy, the massive student protests of May '68, grand new architectural projects, but also new social tensions. And now, the city is once again on the world stage for the 2024 Olympics.
So when you look back at everything, you see it so clearly. The entire history of Paris is this relentless cycle. It's built, it's torn down, and it is rebuilt again, each time stronger and different. Its identity is forged in both its moments of light and its ages of fury.
And that, really, is the central mystery of Paris. The city has survived conquests, plagues, revolutions, and occupations. So after 2 millennia of constant, often violent reinvention, the real question isn't just what Paris has been, but what on earth will it become next?